the aim of our charge is love, and not the aim of our charge is not sound doctrine. The aim of our charge is love, and then the result of love should be sound doctrine. We're not saying we're not about sound doctrine,
which is said, by the way, and this is probably important to point out these days in Western culture, that this concept of a sound mind or mental health is spoken about within the context of a belief structure in a deity.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Wind Ministries podcast. And yes, that's right. I'm Joshua Hoffert, and I'm here with my co-host.
Hello.
Ken Hoffert.
Somehow we're related.
Somehow. Same last name.
That same last name. I wonder where that came from.
I wonder where that came from. Same last name doesn't mean that you have to be related, but
no.
Hoffert's not necessarily a common last name. So
not so common, no.
Yeah, that's right. And but in your birth,
we are related. So
your birth name is John, but
true.
You go by Ken because you're so knowledgeable.
My initials are J. Hoffert, just like your initials.
My initials. That's right.
J. Hoffert.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a conspiracy.
Yeah,
of
there
some
is.
sort
Yeah.
So
you didn't catch my good joke that you go by Ken because you're so knowledgeable. So that's
okay.
That's
But I will say this. I am enjoying a lovely cup of my personally roasted Rwandan coffee.
There you go.
And the mug is nice. I want to thank Lisa, Teresa's cousin, for giving the mug. And Teresa gave me permission to use this mug, Lisa. I just want to know.
There you go. Let's say one of your burgeoning passions is coffee roasting. You got a roaster.
I am enjoying coffee roasting.
You got the roaster for your birthday? Is that what it was, or for Christmas?
For
Christmas, yeah. So he's been
on
bragging.
I've been on the journey.
He's been bragging about his coffee roasting skills to me. Yeah,
they're growing.
They're
growing at an exponential rate.
Maybe eventually we'll have the Wind Ministries coffee roast.
Could do that.
Yeah.
As long as you don't mind having like a half a pound of coffee, and that's it.
But that's right. Yeah, that's right. So I guess it's the natural evolution of coffees with Ken. What you know that?
Yes. Coffee with Ken. Coffee roasting with Ken.
That's right.
Coffee roasting and drinking with Ken.
Yeah.
Coffee tasting.
Right.
Yeah, we could just keep going.
You could just keep going. You're like Forrest Gump. And all
like Forrest Gump too
all
often,
the shrimp there. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. Right. Yeah. Well, we've been doing these episodes for the last this is our 6th episode, actually, talking about what it looks like to move into a place of spiritual and emotional health. Yes. So we're calling that the spiritual health series, or spiritual maturity series.
Okay.
And how do we mature, and how do we go about growing? And we've talked about is it do we just kind of by random happenstance and luck do we happen to mature? Is it because, well, I guess God only has, maybe it's the elect, only the elect are
only those few.
Only those
Depending
few
on how you're connected, it might be only 144,000.
I will say this, the quote unquote elect in the tulip Calvinistic sense, the Reformed sense.
Yeah.
I one of the I would think you could characterize the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5 around a lack of anger and an increasing affection or tenderness for God's creation. I think you could probably say that, right? About Galatians 5.
I think that's a fair assessment.
That's surprising to me that the elect in the quote unquote Reformed circle seem to be more angry all the time and more critical. So anyway.
Well, but only at the bad people.
Only at the bad. That's right.
Yeah.
Only at the bad people.
Only at the bad people.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Isn't it maybe it's characterizing the words of Jesus, but could you say something like, if you just love the people that love you, that's just liking people with a like mind. Yes, love is love when it's loving your enemy. And I think that's kind of what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount.
How dare you bring up that kind of biblical
Yeah,
truth
that's right.
stuff?
I was thinking about this where Paul in Colossians 1 commends the church of Colossae. Okay, there we go. Commends the church of Colossae and says the plant of the gospel is taking root and bearing fruit. And the evidence of that is that Epaphras has come to me and told me of the love that you have.
Right.
And not the right doctrine, not the right practice, not the right leadership principle, but it's the love that they have, the tenderness and the affection that they have for each other. And that's another interesting thing we could talk about at a different time is in the Greek, there's three particular terms for love, right? Phileo, agape, and eros. And we tend to translate those as the same word love, but in the Greek, they're three distinctly different concepts. They're not just different forms of love; they're actually very different concepts in and of themselves. But so anyway, but that's the
they are
evidence.
expressions of affection in some degree, but varying kinds of expressions.
Yeah. So just saying love is not really a helpful way of expressing what those particular
it's such a
mean.
limited concept in English.
Yeah, there's not the words aren't related to each other. Agape is not related to phileo, and phileo.
No, I mean, if you were speaking Greek, you would not ever think I'm saying the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah,
because you're identifying a completely different concept.
Yeah. So Paul. So anyway, that's a thing we could talk about. For those of you who don't know, my dad, his degree is in classical languages, so it's always good to bring up the Greek things to him. So Paul says the evidence of the gospel is the love that they have, right? Yeah. And then one of the ways you see that so clearly laid out is actually in the book of Philemon, whatever.
Philemon.
Yeah, is in the book of Philemon where Paul tells Philemon to treat Onesimus, his slave that's run away and most likely stolen stuff from him and wronged him and left him in the lurch. His slave that's run away, Paul has asked Philemon to treat Onesimus as if Onesimus is Paul. Right? Which is forgive him, restore him, and not just give him work again, but now he's your equal. He's your brother.
Right. Yeah. Treat him as your equal.
Treat him as your equal. So this is the gospel, really.
He's
what
really
Paul
asking
envisions.
A significant amount.
Oh yeah,
a significant
not just
task.
Yeah, it's not just would you forgive him and then you guys can live on other sides of the city, right?
Yeah.
He's saying actually no. My expectation is that the way the gospel takes root is that tender affection is restored between the two of you.
Yeah.
And that's a significant thing, because when we're looking at spiritual maturity, that the mark and the aim, which Paul says this to Timothy in 1 Timothy, he says the aim of our charge is love. That's what the aim. Right. The aim is love from a clear conscience, a sound mind, and a devout faith, basically, is what he says. Which all those things, actually, the word sound mind literally means mental health and a mind that's functioning clearly and properly. So the aim of our charge is love, and not the aim of our charge is not sound doctrine. The aim of our charge is love, and then the result of love should be sound doctrine. We're not saying we're not about sound doctrine,
which is said, by the way, and this is probably important to point out these days in Western culture, that this concept of a sound mind or mental health is spoken about within the context of a belief structure in a deity.
Yeah, that's a very
one
good
that creates.
Yeah,
and so much of our current culture considers that a sign of a lack of mental
Yeah.
health when you are actually having a belief structure or a system of looking at the world, a way of looking at the world that includes an engagement with the creator.
Well, it is almost
And actually think he talks to you. The
it's
creator about talk to me. Yes.
it is an incontrovertible fact that a robust the more solid a person's faith in the sense of um, I have a belief structure, right?
Yeah.
There's different ways we can use that word faith, but in the sense that I have a belief structure, a belief in a deity, the more solid and robust a person's faith, the more consistently in the statistics that person is a emotionally healthy person. And
Well,
it can't even be
I think you're going to have to define that a little bit more than that. Just
okay.
that statement,
So
because
so
because a lot of people would say I have a lot, and that you would think that they have a lot of faith, but
yes.
they somehow they're wonky
Okay. So
when you're.
when you're looking at the numbers across the board,
Mhm.
and you're tracking the trends, and I don't
Yeah.
have the statistics in front of me, but I could find them in the
Okay.
research that I've done. When you're looking across the board at the trends, the people that have a faith to rely on tend to have a greater level of
Okay. So they have.
emotional health.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
Okay. That
Yeah.
makes more sense
It's
because then there's a foundational
yes.
structure that you live within that
Yes.
says I'm not alone in this world.
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
so those you can find study after study after study after study
Yeah.
that will show that
Right.
in terms of emotional health, faith can be one of the factors that contribute to that.
Right.
And
Well,
that's
because if
why I say
someone
it's an
feels like they're all
incontrovertible fact.
alone, if
Yeah.
someone feels all alone and disconnected,
Yeah.
it's going to take a toll on
Yeah.
their
That's
mental
right.
health, as we say.
So
So, yeah,
so those are all kind of precursors to what we're talking about today, because we're talking about emotional and spiritual health, and we've defined emotional and spiritual health as they're not two sides of the same coin. They emotional health is we're defining as the ability of the human being to not lose sight of themselves when they experience strong, difficult emotions.
right,
That's where we see emotional health in action is there.
right.
And that's kind of that gives us the measuring line for it. And spiritual health we would define as the ability to convey in a functional way how aware I am of what God is like, what his thoughts are about me, and how I can communicate that to others.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of just to try and localize it a little bit.
Yeah.
So we're not
Well, that's
saying
fair.
spiritual health is I think it's fair, it's simple, it's easy to grasp. And so that's what we're saying. So the question when it comes to spiritual maturity in general, spiritual maturity, the ability to convey those things in increasingly clear ways.
Yeah.
This is what the Father's like, and now I have a measure of uh, a measure of reducing anxiety and increasing peace because I understand what he's like, that he's for me, that I have that base to draw on, that I'm not alone in the
Right.
world, right? So, one of the questions that I I find people asking and thinking about, especially on this journey of self recovery, is why is there such a large gap between who I am and who I want to be? And that's essentially why we're doing a series like this. Why is there
Right.
a gap there?
Right.
And because everybody experiences a gap in that space, every single person on the face of the earth does.
Yeah.
We have an idea of who we are, and then we have the reality of who we are. And
Sadly.
yeah,
Sad to say.
sadly, yes. And the more those two things do not square with each other, the more cognitive dissonance you will wrestle with in your life.
Mm.
And and cognitive dissonance I would describe as the vague, unsettling feeling of not belonging, not fitting in, and not knowing why things aren't functioning the way they should function in my life.
Well, yeah, because if you have dissonance, you're going to have and from a musical perspective, it's the lack of harmony, the lack
Yeah,
of a tune that flows together.
exactly. Yeah.
So when you have dissonance, your brain, your cognitive function
Yeah.
is not playing the same notes
Yeah.
all
There's
the time.
discordant notes in there, and you're like,
Yeah. Like, why
something
am I
doesn't
thinking this
feel
thought over here?
yeah,
And then over
right.
here, I've got this one, and nothing seems to connect.
Yeah.
And we look for, and it's one of those things in music that you might go off. I love jazz, and you might go off on a tangent and go over here and go over here. But the beauty of it is when you bring it back to resolution.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's not that the tangent has to be too awkward. It's that you're waiting for it to be resolved, where
Right.
it fits back in with the rest of things. And
And
when it's not resolved, I feel like I got left behind, and I
Yeah.
don't know what's going on. And
Yeah.
that's what happened with dissonance.
Exactly. And some great composers take advantage of that, right?
Right.
They leave you lingering on that note, and you're going, why?
Right.
It's not finishing.
Yeah.
It's not there, right? It's the
Yeah.
discordant note. It's
Right.
a really brilliant way of manipulating someone's emotions
Yes.
in a musical setting in a good way. So I've got a quote because today we're dealing with the second layer of the brain, moving on from when we talked about the first layer of the brain, the first stage of development being the attachment center. Now we're going to talk about
right. So that's the part of the brain that develops first and
Yes.
foremost. And as the
Yes.
brain is, it's not that you don't have a brain, it's that these parts of the brain have the most industry happening around them at this
exactly.
particular time.
Yes. Yeah. And so there's certain ages that this all happens
Formation
with.
of
That they're formed in. So we're talking about the assessment center today, which is characterized by the amygdala and what we typically call your fight or flight response.
Right.
And we're going to tease that out a little bit. Here I've got this quote from a Greek Orthodox scholar.
Of course you do.
Yes. Callistos Ware. Well, I'm trying to learn from all kinds.
Okay.
Callistos Ware. And hey, you raised me like this, so
it's my fault.
Yeah. And he's talking about Evagrius. Evagrius was an early monastic figure in the
Yes,
in the
not
church.
a vagrant. Evagrius.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
Evagrius of Pontus, Evagrius the Solitary. He was an early 4th, 5th century desert father, church father, monastic father. And it says it is talking about his concern for his disciples. Mm-hmm. And so Callistos wrote this about Evagrius. There is no doubt that Evagrius was deeply concerned with the quest for hesychia, which is the life of a peaceful spiritual person. The hesychia is the word for peace, quiet, stillness. Yeah. It's throughout the New Testament. For inner stillness or silence of the heart. He wanted his disciples to advance when praying from multiplicity to simplicity, from discursive argumentation to unitive awareness, from talking and thinking about God to being with him.
Okay.
And I read that and I thought, yeah, that's pretty much, we might not use the same language, but that's pretty much what our goal is.
Yeah.
Is to move from arguing about God to being aware that I'm in a union with him.
Yeah.
And to thinking about God, from thinking about God to being aware that I'm present with him. And part of the reason I bring that up is because we have, because maybe it's less so today, but cultural Christianity is a thing, right? I am Christian because I was listening to an interview with a guy named Alex O'Connor, who's an atheist, agnostic, I think, and he was being interviewing Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
And it was a fascinating interview. It was like 2 hours long, and I love listening to that kind of stuff. But what was interesting is this idea has entered into our lexicon that, people have been pointing it out with a statement Richard Dawkins made not that long ago, how he's come to the conclusion that society's better off with religion, but he doesn't like that. So he lives as if he's Christian, but he doesn't consider himself Christian, right? And so this kind of idea has entered into the public consciousness, is that, and Jordan Peterson was essentially making the case that Alex O'Connor is basically a Christian because he's fighting for the truth. He's expressing his logos through ordered speech and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no,
Right.
but I get what he's trying to
That
say.
does not what makes that's
Yeah.
not that's
Yeah.
not what defines a Christian, right?
Yes.
But it
So-
is what defines a human being that is looking towards a moral
Yes.
explanation of life.
Yes. So
and example of life. Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say is that in doing this, our goal is not that we create people that talk more about God, but that recognize He is with us and we are with Him. So anyway, and
And I
helping
think
people.
more than just a feeling sort of a way.
Yeah,
That
totally.
you become spiritually aware of that, but you also become, your brain begins to change so that you become cognizant of that presence as well.
Like for instance, my wife and I have some big decisions we're trying to work through right now, right? And in the backdrop of all these decisions is, will the Father provide for us? Not the Father is in you, but will the Father provide for us?
Yeah.
And what is the thing that He would have us do, right? Yeah. So I'm not like going. I'm having an experience of His presence, but I am aware. I am, like Callisto's where it says unitive awareness, right? I'm aware that my life revolves around Him, and every decision that we're making revolves around Him. And so what spontaneously erupts in our conversation is, trust, God will provide, these kind of things, right? This spontaneously comes into the conversation because it's a part of our awareness of who we are and where we're going. And so it's not so much having a cognizant awareness of the sweetness of God's presence, as it were, but that does happen, but it's my whole life revolves around Him in my life. And that's part of what we're talking about. So we've been talking about in spiritual maturity and defining that and looking through that and periodically revisiting it, which is what we're doing in the first part of this episode. What we want to talk about is the second stage of brain development, building off of our last episode with the first stage of brain development.
Right.
And because the reason we're talking about this too is that the factors that produce spiritual maturity are not random and haphazard, but they are intentional and they are predictable.
Right.
And so where we talked about in the last episode that the attachment center, which is responsible for those first few years of learning to recover yourself and be a person who has a strong sense of identity, that other people are caring for me and I can receive, and in receiving I can learn to relax and be myself.
Right, because I can trust in the receiving.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So the attachment center is that I live from a place of trust.
I want to say this about that trust, and that's that we learn to trust in that because it's not associated with pain that doesn't, or rejection that doesn't get resolved.
Yeah. So when I have a need,
right,
like I'm hungry and I express that as an infant, I have a parental figure who comes and helps me recover and fix that need, not fix the need,
right? Exactly. And I trust that if I cry out,
exactly,
I will have somebody respond to me, and not just respond to me in anger, but respond to me in love and resolve my need. Yes.
Yeah. So
not everybody gets that.
Yeah, that's right.
And
so now I'm attached in the sense of I'm attached to my humanity. I'm attached to other humans, and I trust that I'll be taken care of.
Trust that human right there. Yeah.
And so we'll get into later attachment theory and how the different experiences growing up develop different types of attachment. So the next stage that begins to develop in the childhood stage, and we'll talk more about the factors of the childhood stage in another episode, is the assessment center, which is, like I said, what we call the fight and flight response of the human.
Fight or flight.
Yep. And it's characterized by the amygdala. And so now we're still talking about
back of the brain,
back of the brain,
back of the
right?
head.
We're not talking about the prefrontal cortex, right? We're not talking about the higher, the brain develops through stages. And the amygdala is called the assessment center. It's called fight or flight because it's called the assessment center because it assesses the nature of the thing in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what happens with the first stage of the brain is where that's the very first place you interact with the world. Like it's the first place an infant interacts with the world. It's the first stage we interact with the world in adults. It's the first part of our brain that makes us aware that we exist and are present.
Right.
And so now what happens is I'm faced with a stimulus, meaning some kind of thing happens, which is happening to me constantly. And I'm aware of it happening because my attachment center has established itself. And now the attachment center says, "Hey, I'm seeing this thing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about it?" Right. So I love the Jim Wilder and Marcus Warner and those guys. They talk about the elevator and the brain, right?
Right.
And so the attachment center goes, I'm aware of something, right? I'm aware of something. There's a Kleenex box in front of me, right? So now it flows it up to my assessment center. My assessment center looks at the Kleenex box and goes, "Well, what do we use this thing for?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's searching its memory, searching emotions, trying to figure out how do I connect with that thing, right?
Yeah.
And if have a runny nose, then I'm very happy to see that thing, right? My assessment center is assessing my response to the things in the world.
Right.
And so my assessment center tells me, is this thing a threat or is it not? Right? So I look at the Kleenex box and I go, "Oh, that's not a threat." And so now I can feed it up past my assessment center and go, "This isn't a threat, guys. What do we need to use this for?"
Yeah.
Right? So this is where we're stuck at now is the amygdala, is the assessment center. And basically what happens when the assessment center is well developed and well developed in the sense that it hasn't been hindered in its developmental process through either, the different kinds of trauma that that can impact us in the childhood stage.
Right. Which we haven't been really discussing, but we will. Yeah.
It's basically saying when it comes across a stimuli, a thing coming towards it, it's going, "Okay, calm down. This is okay.
Right.
We're going to be fine." All these chemicals that someone rushed up behind me and grabbed me on the shoulder, and immediately my body goes, "What's the threat?"
That? What's going on?
My
What's
assessment
happening?
center sees the face and goes, "Okay, calm down.
That's my best friend. Yeah.
That's my best friend. We recognize this person." Now it's feeding the assessment up the chain, right? And so in a healthy way, it helps us to respond properly if someone cuts us off in traffic and we need to, what just happened, right? Now I've got.
You can't say that in Western culture for people. Yeah. You can't. I mean, if someone cuts you off in traffic, what are you supposed to do?
Tailgate them, flash your lights at them, right?
Honk your horn, yell, scream, tell the story for 3 days when you get home.
If you're in Florida or Texas, pull your gun on them.
Pull your gun on them, yeah. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
That might have some issues with this part of the brain.
Yeah, that's right. So the assessment center is going, "I've just been cut off. Yeah. Well, I need to," and my chemicals are on overdrive. I'm hyper aware. And now I need to respond to the threat of the looming vehicle in front of me by pressing the brakes, right? So that when the assessment center is working well, it warns us of threats,
right?
And tells us, and then helps the rest of our
navigate
brain.
It. Yeah, helps us navigate those threats.
It says it looks at the car and says, "This is a threat." Tail lights, and then it goes up to the attunement center,
right?
And
what do we do about it?
Yeah. What do we do about it? We press the brakes, right? So it says, "This is a threat. We need to respond," right?
And all of that's happening in just nanoseconds.
Right. Nanoseconds. Before that happens before conscious thought. It's pre-conscious thought. Not even subconscious thought. It's pre-conscious thought.
Right.
So that, let's see. just changing something there. So that's when it's working in its functional operation, right? When you've got a strong, healthy attachment, and so now
And
you're
out
in a
of that, out
trust.
of the strength of that
Exactly.
attachment, I can now look at something and determine, is it safe or is it not safe?
Yes.
I
So
can at least make some determination out of a healthy um, attachment.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. So the amygdala is essentially where emotional memory is stored, and
yeah.
this is where we get into trouble.
Well, because
Yeah.
emotional memory is very different than what we typically
Yes.
describe as memory, because emotional memory doesn't have language
Yes.
necessarily. It has
Yes.
emotions. It's the language of emotions, but it's a very different kind of language.
Yeah. It's
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 it's a
it
feel.
it is a feel.
Yeah,
And so and this is where we can respond to, we talked about this last week, pre-verbal trauma.
right.
And again, we're going to talk more about types of trauma and the impact of trauma, but it's germane to the conversation, so it keeps coming up. Um, so say I have well, let's go extreme case. I have a physically abusive parent, and
Sometimes I don't think that's as extreme as we think,
no,
but
it's not. It's actually
it's far too
yeah,
common.
the
Yes,
statistics
but
on those kind of things.
let's hope that you're in a situation where that's not true. But if
Yeah.
you are,
Right. I think
then
it's, what is it? It's at least the statistics is at least 1 in 4 children are a victim of sexual abuse of some kind.
I would imagine
And
that's true. Yeah,
and it changes based on the gender. It's more dramatic or less dramatic, but
yeah,
it's a significant amount, right? There were not, people tend to think it doesn't happen as much as it does, but it happens a lot.
yeah.
Let's say it's physical abuse, right? Let's just go, there's a physically abusive spouse,
Damaging,
or fair,
hurting.
yeah,
Right. Yes.
damaging, hurting,
Yeah.
um, not calming the child down, but
Right.
responding in anger and lashing out, right?
Right.
So what happens is your body begins to learn that that person is a threat.
Right.
And so now when your assessment center sees that person, right off the bat, you've got an autonomic nervous system response,
Right.
because they've been assessed as a threat,
Right.
right? Because they hurt me in the past and they'll continue to hurt me,
Right.
right? And so and the problem that I mean, there's so much we could say about this, but the problem, most people, like, I think about when we talk about trauma, most people think of trauma as the triggering event, but trauma isn't the triggering event.
Mm.
Trauma is the lingering impact on the brain and the body that the
Right.
event had.
Right.
And so trauma is actually the cortisol that's injected into my system that never discharges, and my body learns to function with a heightened awareness of
Mm.
danger and fear. So
Right.
it's not the event triggers it, it's the actual response that never gets discharged and worked through that
Who was it
creates
who
the
wrote that
trauma.
book? The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah, Bessel van der Kolk.
Russell, yeah,
Yeah.
which is a great book,
Yeah.
because it talks about how we store these things and how they
Yeah.
just in our body,
Yeah, that's right.
and how that affects how we interact with the world around us.
Yeah. And actually there's another good book that pulls that stuff apart called Waking the Tiger by Peter
Mm.
Levine. Both these guys we're not talking about Christian authors, right? We're just seeing trends that biblical truths help us address.
Yeah, they have wisdom because
Yeah,
of what
there's
they've done.
wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically when you've assessed a threat, because of circumstances, the emotional memory takes over, and fear is present, and your
Mhm.
palms get sweaty, your face gets flushed, your body's responding as if there's a
Yeah.
threat in front of
Right.
you, right? It's trying to give you a hyper awareness so that you have your nervous system responds, and you can respond
You got to
with
get the chemicals flowing.
your
Right.
reflexes. That's the word
Right.
I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your reflexes are on overdrive,
Yeah.
right? So there's 4 typical responses that human beings have and share, actually 3 of them with animals,
Mm.
the animal kingdom: fight, flight, freeze, appease. Those are the four, right? Appease is something humans do. Appease isn't something animals do. So in fight or flight, right? You think of there's a great video where a deer is being attacked by a cheetah, and the deer initially sees the threat of the cheetah and tries flight, right? Assessing the threat, going, I'm not going to win this battle,
Right.
right? So I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight.
Yeah.
And then when the cheetah catches the deer, now it's moved on to a freeze response, because the freeze response basically is called an immobility response. The immobility response discharges certain chemicals into the body,
Right.
so that the body of the deer will lay itself down and prepare to die. Okay, it's basically deadening the feeling and numbing the feeling and the sensation. So I'm going to die. My body's preparing me for death. And there's a video where then in this video, I'm thinking of the deer is attacked by the cheetah, and then some hyenas show up and chase the cheetah away, and they all get into a fight and forget about the deer. A few minutes go by, and the deer starts to get back up, and the deer is shaking wildly, like visibly. What the deer's doing is it's discharging the chemical reaction that came into its body, one, to give it the adrenaline that it needed for the flight response, and two, the chemicals that deadened its nerves so that it wouldn't feel the pain of as much of the pain of the jaguar's response or the cheetah's response, the cheetah's bite, and so it shakes them all off, and then gets up and runs off to go join its pack. None the worse for wear. Basically, in a kind of cognitive emotional sense, right? Maybe they've been scratched and bitten and all that, so there is some wear there. And the difference between the deer and the human is that the human's shaking off process is far more complicated. And without the support of loving community, without the kind of wise, loving parental units, without supportive friends that can build the person up, it's next to impossible to discharge the trauma response. And so the deer has it baked into themselves. And it may be like humans get tired after having an event like that, right?
Sure.
Your body is on overdrive. There's certain things that are biochemical responses, and then we don't listen to those. We don't pay attention to those. We don't have the people to help us walk through that. Now you have a whole generation of traumatized individuals. And so you have this advent of pharmaceutical care and the helping, the help of the therapeutic industry, that kind of stuff is all because people have undischarged trauma.
Right.
And so now what happens is that later in life, right, you never had someone help you work through that. Later in life now, your body has learned that when these kind of people come into my circle, right, my assessment center, my amygdala, because it's been damaged, or it's just the way that it's developed has been hindered by the way people have treated me.
Right.
It's not really damage in that sense, because recovery is always a thing. Now I see a person, maybe that person is a little bit older than me. They could be a father figure, but my assessment center, the amygdala, goes, they're a threat. Because I remember in my emotional memory how they treated me and how I felt. And all of a sudden, my face is flushed, my palms are sweaty, I'm nervous, and I don't know how to respond, and I freeze. Right? Well, and then later I go, why did I respond that way? What happened to me? What happened to you was that your amygdala assessed that as a threat based on your experience, your history, and your memory, and you didn't even realize it, and you had a fear response, and you froze.
Right.
Because I don't know what to do. Nobody helped me learn that I could. Fight or flight is actually a better response, because those typically discharge the emotions, discharge the chemicals. So the flight response is adrenaline. I use the adrenaline when I run, and then I have discharged it by running, right? But when I freeze, I'm stuck, and all those chemicals stay right there. Appease is very similar. I respond very subjective, or not subjectively, subjugatingly, right? I just try and appease the situation rather than actually respond to the situation. And so you can see in describing that attachment, trust, I'm doing good. Now I've got a trauma. I don't have anybody to help me process this. Something bad has happened. My assessment center has learned this kind of person is bad. When this kind of thing happens, I need to respond. And now it feeds it up through the attunement center into the executive center. And the executive center is already going, well, wait a second, guys, like it's just a person, but it's too late.
Right.
Because the executive center is the realm of conscious thought. That's just a person. They're perfectly fine. But down here, you've already got the chemicals.
I've already committed.
You've already committed. Exactly.
My body and that part of my brain is already committed. And
so the best
rational thought doesn't mean anything. Yeah.
Without addressing that, the best you can do is try and convince yourself it's okay.
Right.
There's no scary.
You try to walk. You do use tools to walk yourself backwards,
yes.
but it's still a process of having to get rid of how you initially responded.
Yes.
You know, the opposite of a lot of that is true too. So it's because we focus on the negative a lot of times because of how the damage is. But I remember I was interpreting dreams at a outdoor event one time, and this couple came in and they had their young son with them, and I guess their young son didn't have a lot of social interaction. It was not fully developed in every way, but he really began to enjoy hanging out with me.
Right.
And the parents were kind of amazed, and then they finally realized that I looked like his grandfather because of my white beard and all this and that. And so it was so though we associate some things with a fear or fight, he could come and his brain could say to him, even though he wasn't fully, wasn't really developed completely. His brain could say, hey, I know that my experience with that kind of person right there has been that they have been kind to me and they have been good to me, and I can trust that. Right. And so we come to that place of fight or flight, but that's our emotional response. We're trying to determine whether we can trust that thing. And if we can trust it, then we don't have to do either of those things. We can just rest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We can just go.
But sadly, not there's a large percentage of our population, and all of us really, to some degree, are going to react first and foremost out of this lack of healthy approaches because of trauma.
Yeah.
And we go back to that trauma. We talk about trauma a lot, but we just, there are good and poor and bad responses to all of this. So,
yeah. So here's something here. I'm just going to read a quote from Bessel van der Kolk from The Body Keeps the Score.
Okay.
He calls the amygdala the smoke detector of the brain.
Yeah,
we've said that before. Yeah. But that's what we're saying is the assessment center.
Right.
And starts developing, starts its, what was the word you used? It's develop. I can't remember. You used a particular word that was really good. Anyway, around the age of 2 is when it really starts to develop. He said, while the smoke detector is usually pretty good at picking up danger clues, trauma increases the risk of misinterpreting whether a particular situation is dangerous or safe.
Yeah.
You can get along with other people only if you accurately gauge whether their intentions are benign or dangerous. Right.
Sure.
Woman walking down the street at night looks at a stranger and goes, right? Immediately assessing that this is a danger risk, right? Because of what's happened, the stories they've heard, all that stuff, right? Maybe it's happened to them.
Right.
And so if I can't accurately gauge whether they're benign or dangerous, I'm going to respond in a way from my heightened awareness, right? And in that sense, it's good. You need to be unaware for that in a situation like that.
Right.
That's your body's responding.
That's why
properly.
You have it, right?
Right. Exactly. That's why you have it. Yeah.
Right.
So then he said this, even a slight misreading can lead to painful misunderstandings in relationships at home and at work.
Yep.
Right. So say that person that's walking towards you is actually your husband. or your boyfriend.
Yeah.
And you can't see him because of the shadows on the street. You can't tell, right? So
Yeah.
you pull out your can of mace and mace him down, right? Without
So all it is a
realizing.
can of mace.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean,
Right.
right? So
Exactly.
now we've inaccurately assessed the situation because of a way that our amygdala, the smoke detector,
Yeah.
has assessed the situation because of memories and emotions
Right.
that have been fed into the amygdala. And now, because I've done that, I've actually ticked someone off. Versus it could be an actual abuser, and now you actually are prepared to fight. But
Could be a dangerous
it
situation.
could be a dangerous situation. So the ability to accurately assess whether that's a threat or not is really important, and especially for maintaining deep, intimate relationships where I can grow and thrive in relative stability.
Yeah.
If I can't accurately assess their intention to me, and part of that is because of trauma that's stored in the amygdala or other parts of the brain,
Right.
it doesn't have to be just the amygdala. The amygdala is the place that assesses that. I'm going to have a really hard time maintaining functional relationships.
Right.
I'm going to assess my significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse hasn't texted me in 3 days. Right? Well, they don't love me anymore. The last time someone did this to me, right now I've got emotional memory coming in. I'm assessing them as a threat, and I'm responding accordingly, right?
Yeah.
So all that stuff can hinder our ability to walk and maintain healthy integrated relationships,
Yeah.
which in order to reframe our assessment center requires healthy, committed relationships. Like I can't do it without actually seeing other people do it and learning a whole different way of being. I need other people in my life to be able to, because I can't see myself in light of who I am without other people around me. I can't.
Right.
I don't know who I am without other people interacting with me. You literally as a human can't define yourself without other people. It's pretty much impossible.
You're not an island.
You're not an island. No, that's Thomas Merton, or not Thomas. Yeah, Thomas Merton. No man is an island, right? You're not an island. Yeah. And so I actually need the support of a healthy community to be able to recover. And therein lies the genius of what we were saying earlier with Paul's expectation of what happens when the gospel takes root in the city of Colossae, is now we've got a vibrant, loving, affectionate, tender, forgiving, supportive community helping people recover themselves.
Right.
So Paul can send Onesimus to Philemon, because he can go, the gospel is flourishing there, not because they know, not because all of them have said the sinner's prayer, but because the fruit of the Spirit is evident in their midst, and the love that Jesus came and expected and then gave us the pathway to appreciate through the infilling of the Holy Spirit. Now that's taking root. And so now I'm recovering myself because I see what it's like to participate as a human being in a healthy, vibrant community.
Right.
Right.
So the amygdala, or the attachment center.
Yeah.
Of the brain.
Assessment or attachment?
The attachment center.
Yeah, attachment.
Of the brain.
Yeah, thalamus.
Helps us.
The thalamus is
right,
what
exactly. So the attachment center, which is that first part that develops, helps us to see whether we can trust people in the world. How do we trust? How do we engage? So then you're saying that the assessment center helps us to see what's safe and what isn't safe in the world.
Exactly.
So in the genius of God creating humanity, we first learn to trust. We second learn to determine whether things are safe or not safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
So we don't determine if it's safe or not safe first. We learn to connect, and out of our connections, I think that's the beauty of it. Out of healthy connections, we can then assess the situations in the world around us to determine if there's and so that we can then make a determination further up the road what a response would likely be. But one flows into the other. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, and actually, you can see that reflected in the story of creation in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Right, the first thing is God creates Adam, and then gives him instruction, walks with him, and gives him provision. Right? It says, "Here's you can eat of any tree in the garden."
Yeah.
Right? So now I
I've
can
got you
trust.
covered. Got you
I'm
taken
being
care of.
taken
Yeah.
care of. I'm being nourished. Right? And now I'm given a partner in Eve. Right?
Right.
And now I'm assessing myself in light of her.
Right.
Right? So you can actually see the stages of brain development in the creation narrative.
Yeah.
And then you've got attunement with the snake and executive function in overriding what God said would be good. So you can see the various stages of maturity happening right
Or
there.
immaturity, one of the two.
Yeah, where it breaks down, right? Where it
Right.
breaks down.
Right.
Um, and it's incredibly helpful to recognize and understand that my responses to certain situations are, oh, that's simply how I've learned to be.
Right.
And now I need to learn another way of being.
Well, and I think when we kind of as in our relationships in the world, we look at someone and say, "Man, that that person is acting in such an immature fashion."
Sure.
When we think that, we don't always say it, but when we think that, or some rendition of that, we're
Right.
recognizing that they are not responding to the world in a healthy way.
Yeah, that's right.
And we see that in ourselves as well. Like, why do I do the things that I do? I'm not responding to the world and the relationships around me that I know cognitively
Right.
when my brain starts working on the other side, that these are people I can trust. But when I first see something I don't trust,
Yeah.
and I think that happens to a lot of people is I don't trust, and I don't know why. But when I think
Right.
about it, I should trust. And then I can't understand why I break these relationships on a regular basis. These are going to be some things we talk about over the coming weeks. Is that
Yeah.
right? How we get there and
Yeah.
how we get out of there. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Because
it does have to do with how the brain develops and why it develops the way that it does develop, so that we can help ourselves walk
right.
into maturity. And there are ways to walk to learn how to walk in maturity. Isn't that true?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Otherwise, this whole endeavor, the whole endeavor of human life is, um, what, eat, poop, and breathe, and then die.
That is some
That's
philosophies of
yeah.
somebody. I mean, that's when you pull the creator out of the equation.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's interesting what you're left with.
My first point of contact with in a Christian sense, spiritual formation sense, my first point of contact with healing um um the kind of responses I have is with my point of contact with God.
Sure.
He begins to reframe what that's like, which is why, in a way, going back to what we were saying earlier, it's a travesty that God has been communicated to people as being full of wrath versus being full of love,
Right.
and that being the thing that's emphasized to bring people into an awareness of the gospel. Well, you need to be afraid of God because He's going to send you to hell.
Yeah.
When my first point of contact with Him is His love and His tenderness, and because if my first point of contact is again fear, it's no wonder that we have certain people that are elected. We
Well,
have
and I
certain people
think
that are
that's
elected because their amygdala is a bit healthier.
and I think that's when John in his gospel writes in chapter 3, and he's having this conversation with Nicodemus, um, that God loved the world in such a fashion that He sent
Yeah.
His only Son.
Yeah.
But we always we not always, but we often just pay attention to that. God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, and He goes
We got
on to say
verses
He
17,
didn't.
18, and
Yeah,
19.
exactly. He didn't come into the world to condemn the world.
Yeah.
He didn't come into the world to create a wrathful situation. Let me read that because I think it's just.
Yeah. Go for it.
I'm gonna grab that real quick. Give me a second here. And there's so many different translations you can read that, but it says, God loved the world so much that he gave his only son so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but have eternal life. And then we quote that. We put that up on signboards at football games and all that kind of stuff. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. And saved is what? It's that sozo word, which is a word for healing, restoring, bringing to health. Yes. So when we say saved through him, it's not this thing of salvation that people talk about where I'm either going to heaven or I'm going to hell, one of those two. That's not what he's saying here.
Yeah.
He said he didn't come to the world so the world might be saved and go to heaven. He says so that the world might be restored in a fashion that is healthy and whole. So, and that's what happens through Jesus, because he comes in and restores it. Those who believe in him are not condemned, but those who do not believe are condemned already because they have not believed in the name of the Son of God, which is the one that restores the world in such a way so that it's healthy. But if I refuse a healthy world, I've already condemned myself because I say that world, I don't like the world that's healthy. I want the one that's broken.
Right. That's right.
And that's a powerful statement that John makes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and the thing is, when it comes to sozo, that word for
sozo,
putting everything back together, is for the human being, and this is where salvation is characterized as in our contemporary context as a moment in time, the sinner characterized by the sinner's prayer,
a choice that one makes. Yes,
the choice that one makes. Largely functioning in the evangelical world.
Right.
This isn't really how it works in the Catholic or the Orthodox world. I think they have a much better thought process in approaching that, because the idea of sozo is not a one-time transaction, but it's the human being takes a lifetime to be put back together.
Right.
And that in fact, when we reach whatever the quote unquote ever after looks like, it's like you're finally going to go, this is what it's like to be put back together.
Yeah.
And so the human journey is a journey of being put back together.
Right.
The Christian journey is one of being put back together by God. And it's not a moment in time. It's a lifelong process. It's a lifelong endeavor. One of the things I want to say, just an observation that I've had a number of times, is when you think about the stages of brain development, the way that we get stuck and the way that we get healthy again, and the way people think when they've been impacted at those various stages, I've often wondered if you could track the overall, if you were to kind of distill theological dispositions into maybe 4 categories, you could probably go, oh yeah, well, that theologian developed that system because of that trauma in that part of the brain.
Yeah,
and that
I would
makeup.
think that's very.
I think theological systems in that sense are a reflection of man's attempt to understand a journey to God. And you can't, going Lutheran, Calvin, Catholic, whatever, right? You're going, all of them are man's attempt to characterize the journey through the lens of brokenness and a lack of integration,
right,
on some level, right?
Right.
And some of them are better than others, but this one of the things I've been thinking about lately is this whole concept of having an experience of God that is so characterized, a large portion of Christianity.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't know that, because we're so central to the story, like in our own lives, right? Like,
is there anybody else that's more central to my story?
Yeah,
that's how I see myself. I'm the center.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, existence is fundamentally narcissistic.
Right.
Right. On some level. I'm not
what you're saying is that I am, it's all about me.
I can't see myself. I can't see my dad as the center of the story because I've never experienced that. Right. And so I live my life as if I'm the center of the story. And what's amazing about the gospel is that the gospel says, actually, you're not the center of the story. God's the center of the story.
Yeah.
And this is his creation, and this is his story. So we talk about experiencing God, but we should really be talking about God experiencing us, because that's what we're talking about when it comes to the human experience. Is actually the human experience is that God experiences us, and he created people that would experience him.
Right.
And this is the story of the garden. This is a story of the gospel. This is the story of the bride. Like Ephesians 5, the great marriage chapter, it says that Jesus gave himself to the bride, cleansed and purified her, and then presented her back to him as a gift. It's all about him.
Yeah.
It's not about her cleansing and purifying herself. It's about he gave himself to her, cleansed and purified her in order to give her to him. Yeah. It's all about him. Right. He's the story, right?
Well, and it would sound, and it can sound egotistical. What do you mean God wants everyone to experience him? I mean, well, there is something great about that.
Yeah.
There is a creator that made all of these things. And within the context, I know now we're getting into some, but within the context of a created order, of a whole of creation, and the people that are probably listening to us are engaged in trying to find their way through this created order to the one that ordered it all. And that's, if we engage with the one that put the whole created order together, then it is a phenomenal experience for the human being, a part of creation, to be able to engage with the very one that put us together.
That's right.
We think, like you were saying a minute ago, if I'm the center of the story, I don't really care what else goes on.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about what happened, what I do, and what I'm thinking about, and how I engage with things. But if I stop for a second and realize I'm part of a created order, and as I look at that created order, and I'm given an invitation to engage with the one that put the order together, that ordered everything so that it would be in a way that worked for all of us.
Yeah.
Then I can be impressed with that and celebrate that in such a way that I'm now reflecting that celebration back to others, which then is the very essence of what humanity is about.
Yeah, that's take up your
holding
cross,
and reflecting.
Take up your cross and follow me.
Right.
The antidote for life as narcissism is taking up your cross on a daily basis and following him. Right, you're not the center of the story; he is. And
all of those things flow better when we have a healthy way of engaging with the world.
That's
and recognizing that there's a process for being healthy and whole and mature that can get waylaid.
Yeah, that's right.
And often does.
And I guess that's what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, in our roundabout way. But that's why we like podcasting things, because we could talk through it. Yeah.
And we can cut it out if we don't like it.
Yeah, that's right. If we don't like it, that's right. Yeah. So, well, I think with that, Dad, we'll call this episode to a close.
All right.
And we will continue in our next episode talking about the attunement center. Who are my people, and what are they like, and how do we respond? So
we're going to talk about teenagers.
Yeah, basically, that is the attunement center. Yep. That's right.
And if you wonder what we mean by that, join us next time.
Yeah, join us next time. That's right. So everybody, thank you so much for joining, and tell everybody else about the podcast, and leave us a review on your whatever podcasting platform you're on, Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever it is. That lets everybody else know what we're about. So that would be helpful. So anyway, thanks everybody, and until next time, God bless.